Ethan and Layla Moore seemed like the perfect couple, until Ethan noticed Layla flinching around his father, avoiding his touch, and deleting his voicemails. What began as subtle tension spiraled into a chilling revelation that would destroy everything Ethan thought he knew about his wife, and uncover a monstrous secret buried deep in his own family. Ethan Moore lived a quiet, content life in a small suburb outside Portland. He wasn't flashy or loud. He enjoyed the simple things: morning coffee, long walks, and quiet evenings with a good book. At 33, he had everything he thought he'd ever want. He worked as a school teacher, respected by both students and colleagues, and he was known for his calm demeanor and genuine smile. 2 years earlier, he had married Layla, a nurse he met at a community fundraiser. She had a soft laugh, curious eyes, and a presence that made people feel safe. The connection was instant, and within months, they were inseparable. Friends and family were quick to comment on how perfect they seemed together. Their personalities balanced each other out. Ethan was methodical and observant, while Layla was spontaneous and thoughtful. They shared a love for the outdoors, old movies, and cooking together on slow Sunday evenings. Their home, a modest 2-story house surrounded by evergreens, reflected their life: warm, quiet, and comfortable. Ethan's father, Gerald, was a regular presence in their lives. A retired construction worker in his early 60s, Gerald was rough around the edges but fiercely loyal to his only son. He lived alone about 30 minutes away and often dropped by unannounced, sometimes bringing leftover soup or old tools he thought Ethan could use. Ethan adored his father. His mother had passed away years ago, and Gerald had raised him single-handedly. Despite his gruffness, Gerald had always been dependable, a constant in Ethan's life. Layla, however, never seemed at ease around him. In the beginning, Ethan chalked it up to shyness. She was polite but distant, rarely engaging Gerald in conversation. Whenever he visited, she would excuse herself early, claiming a headache or a phone call to return. At dinners, she pushed her food around the plate and offered tight smiles when Gerald tried to joke. Ethan occasionally brought it up, but Layla brushed it off, saying it was just a matter of adjusting to new family dynamics. But over time, the distance grew harder to ignore. Layla became visibly uncomfortable in Gerald's presence. She would tense up when Ethan mentioned him, and once even flinched when Gerald touched her shoulder during a family photo. Ethan tried to talk to her again, gently, but she waved it away. "It's nothing," she said, "just my nerves." Still, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. He noticed Layla would retreat into herself for hours after Gerald's visits, sometimes not speaking for the rest of the evening. She stopped attending family gatherings and refused to go to Gerald's birthday dinner. She claimed work stress, exhaustion, anything but the truth. Ethan didn't want to push her. He respected her space, believing love meant trust, even when things didn't make sense. In his mind, this was just a phase, something emotional Layla hadn't processed. Everyone had baggage, he told himself. They would work through it with time. But deep down, something uneasy had begun to settle in Ethan's chest, the kind of worry that grows roots before you even realize it's there. The tension in the Moore household grew slowly, like a fog that thickened each day without anyone noticing at first. Ethan continued to excuse Layla's behavior, but the small inconsistencies were beginning to stack up in ways that were harder to ignore. He told himself it was stress. Layla's shifts at the hospital had become more erratic, and she was often tired or emotionally drained. Still, it wasn't just fatigue. Something deeper was unraveling, just beyond his reach. Layla had developed a habit of disappearing into her own world. She would stare out the window for long stretches, sometimes forgetting she had food on the stove or leaving laundry half-folded. Her phone was always nearby, but Ethan noticed she never let it sit face up anymore. One evening, she jumped when he reached to move it off a cushion, laughing nervously and saying she'd dropped it earlier and cracked the screen. Ethan nodded, trying not to let his concern show. The changes weren't only in her mood. Layla became secretive about money. Their joint account, which they had both used freely since getting married, started showing strange activity. Ethan found charges from places neither of them had mentioned, a roadside motel several towns away, expensive wine from a boutique he didn't recognize, and 3 separate ATM withdrawals that weren't at their usual bank. When he brought it up, Layla shrugged and claimed it was for a friend who had needed quick help, someone going through a bad breakup. She looked him in the eye and offered just enough detail to make the lie believable. Ethan wanted to believe her, so he did. But the doubts lingered. One Saturday, while organizing the basement, Ethan came across an old tool chest that used to belong to his father. Gerald had given it to him shortly after he and Layla got married, insisting it was full of practical junk that Ethan might find useful. When he opened it, he noticed it had been disturbed. Items were missing, and several drawers were empty that used to be filled with screwdrivers, photo slides, and old receipts. He thought it strange, but figured he had misplaced the contents over time. That night, he came home earlier than usual after a canceled dinner with friends. The house was quiet, but the basement light was on. He crept down and found Layla kneeling, in front of the open chest, digging through its contents. She didn't hear him at first. When she realized he was there, she jumped up, slamming it shut. Her face went pale, and she said she was just organizing. She didn't explain what she was looking for, and Ethan didn't ask. The next morning, the chest was gone. Ethan searched the garage, the attic, even the crawl space. Nothing. He considered calling his father to ask if he'd taken it back, but something in his gut held him back. The disappearance felt deliberate, calculated. There were too many small things adding up now, forming a picture Ethan couldn't yet understand. And Layla, once open and affectionate, now moved through the house like a shadow, present, but unreachable. Weeks passed, and Ethan's home no longer felt like his own. The warmth that once defined his marriage was gone, replaced by an icy quiet that hung in the air like fog. Layla moved mechanically through her days, saying little, her smiles tight and fleeting. Ethan found himself second-guessing everything, her words, her silences, even her touch. There were no fights, no outbursts, just a growing space between them that neither acknowledged. He still hadn't found the missing tool chest, and its absence gnawed at him in the back of his mind. Something important had been inside it, though he didn't know what. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, an old faded image of Gerald standing beside a teenage girl. The background was unfamiliar, a run-down building with broken windows and weeds growing through the concrete. But what caught Ethan's breath was the girl. Her face was younger, her hair longer and lighter, but the resemblance was unmistakable. It was Layla. He turned the photo over. Written on the back in hurried handwriting were 5 words. Ask her about Black Ridge Road. That was all. No signature, no date, no explanation. Ethan stared at it for a long time, his mind racing. Black Ridge Road was where his father's old cabin sat, a place Gerald rarely talked about. Ethan had only been there a handful of times as a child, and not in years. He hadn't even known Layla had ever been there. The photo was too specific to ignore. That weekend, while Layla was working a night shift, Ethan made the quiet drive out to the cabin. The road was rough and overgrown with weeds. No car had driven that way in a long time. The cabin stood where he remembered it, tucked into the trees like a secret. Its windows were dark, and the wood siding was chipped and weathered. He hesitated before entering. Dust clung to the floorboards, and cobwebs hung thick in the corners. Nothing looked touched. But something about the place felt wrong. Like it was frozen in time, hiding something just beneath the surface. In a cabinet in the back bedroom, he found a box marked "Tools" in fading black ink. Inside were not tools, but tapes. Old VHS tapes, stacked neatly, each with a name written in marker. Sandra, Mia, Jenny. One near the bottom was marked simply LM. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. Layla's initials. He didn't watch the tape. Not yet. He couldn't. Hands trembling, he took it home and locked it in the garage, unsure what to do next. He didn't tell Layla. Not that night, not the next. Something was unraveling fast, and he no longer knew who to trust. His wife, his father, or even his own instincts. What had seemed like a simple, quiet life was beginning to crack at the edges, revealing something far more disturbing underneath. The tape sat untouched in the garage for days, sealed inside a plain cardboard box as if it were radioactive. Ethan went about his routine as best he could, pretending everything was normal while the weight of the cassette pulled at his thoughts, like an anchor. He barely spoke to Layla, and she didn't seem to notice. She had grown distant, almost hollow, walking through the house like a guest in someone else's life. Her phone remained glued to her hand, her eyes always somewhere else. Ethan caught her staring at him sometimes, like she was waiting for something, though whether it was fear, guilt, or something else, he couldn't tell. The silence between them grew unbearable. Ethan knew he couldn't keep pretending. One night, when he couldn't sleep, he slipped into the garage, opened the box, and stared at the tape again. He dusted off an old player, plugged it into the small TV in the corner, and inserted the tape. The screen flickered for a moment before cutting to static. Then, an image appeared. The footage was grainy and washed out by time, but the faces were clear enough. Gerald sat in a worn armchair, facing the camera, his voice calm and measured. Across from him sat a girl, no older than 16, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap. Her face was younger, but unmistakable. Layla. She didn't speak, only nodded as Gerald talked. He spoke in a soft, coaxing tone, carefully choosing his words. Ethan couldn't hear everything, but what he did catch made his skin crawl. Gerald wasn't threatening or loud. He was methodical. He told the girl not to be scared, that no one would believe her if she told anyone. He reminded her of how close they were, and said it had all been just a misunderstanding. The girl said nothing. Her expression was blank, her eyes unfocused, like she had checked out of her own body. Ethan stopped the tape and sat in the dark garage, unable to breathe. His father, his hero, the man who had raised him, was a predator. And Layla. She wasn't just a victim. She had carried this for years. When Ethan confronted her, he didn't raise his voice. He simply handed her the tape. Layla froze, then slowly sat down and stared at it. For a long moment, neither of them said a word. Finally, she whispered the truth. She had met Gerald when she was 15. She was alone, vulnerable, and he had taken advantage of that. He had told her lies, manipulated her trust, and vanished from her life without warning. Years later, when she met Ethan, she didn't recognize his last name right away. But when she saw a photo of Gerald in their home, it all came rushing back. She hadn't meant to fall in love with Ethan. She had considered walking away 100 times. But part of her needed answers, needed closure. She wasn't sure what she had been looking for, justice maybe, or understanding. But now the secret was out, and nothing would ever be the same again. The confession marked the end of everything Ethan thought he knew about his life. His marriage, his childhood, and even his own identity felt like they had been built on a lie. The days that followed were a blur. He moved through them like a ghost, unsure of what to say or do. Layla stayed in the house, but they barely spoke. The silence between them now held something final. It was no longer confusion or tension. It was understanding. They both knew the truth. There was nothing left to hide. Ethan couldn't look at his father the same way. Gerald had been the man who packed his school lunches, built his first bike, and told bedtime stories when his mother died. That man had also been capable of something monstrous. Ethan wondered how many other parts of his father's life had been hidden from view. The thought made him sick. Layla handed over everything. The photo, the envelope, even another tape she had found in a box in the attic, one she hadn't dared to watch. She had been quietly collecting evidence for months. At first, she wasn't sure what she would do with it, but once Ethan found the original tape, she knew it was time. She told him she had tried to move on from what happened all those years ago, but seeing Gerald again had reopened something in her. A need for justice, yes, but also a need to finally be believed. Together, they went to the police. The investigation was slow at first. Gerald denied everything. He called the tapes fakes and accused Layla of inventing the story to ruin his family. But when the footage was analyzed and matched to the year the cabin was in use, and when another woman came forward after hearing whispers of the case in the community, the foundation of Gerald's lies began to crumble. Charges were filed, multiple counts involving minors from over 2 decades ago. Some cases fell outside the statute of limitations, but enough remained to build a solid case. Gerald was arrested quietly one morning at his home. News spread fast in their small town. People who had admired him for years now looked at him with disgust. Ethan stayed away from it all. He didn't attend the hearings. He couldn't bear to see the man who had shaped his life now sitting behind a courtroom bench in handcuffs. Layla eventually moved out. There was no dramatic goodbye, just a quiet parting, as if both of them knew they had walked as far together as they could. Ethan never blamed her. If anything, he felt guilt for being connected to the man who had hurt her. He stopped teaching, sold the house, and left the town where he had spent his entire life. He never returned to Black Ridge Road. The past had taken too much already, and what remained could never be reclaimed.